Sweet.
Welcome to the very first Fischer Backcountry Safety Tips series. We've got 3 in the series here coming up. My name's Mike Hattrup, and I am the Fischer U.S. Product Manager and Content Director. I'm also an American Mountain Guide Association ski mountaineering guide, and I have with me tonight Sarah Carpenter, who is also an AMGA ski mountaineering guide and co-owner of the American Avalanche Institute, which is based out of Jackson Hole. They are the oldest educational avalanche organization in the U.S. They started in 1973, before Sarah was born. And with all the excitement this year about skiing and backcountry, we thought it was appropriate to do a little bit of either introduction or refresher, depending on where you are, to avalanches. It's mind-blowing to me the amount of excitement that there is for skiing this year. You'd think we'd been cut off for skiing for the last 3 years, but really it was only the last month at the end of the year. But that prompted people to not only want to resort ski, but a whole bunch of people that maybe weren't interested in the backcountry before are now. So this will be a great introductory discussion on what you need to be prepared when you go out there, when you go from the resort to the backcountry, where to find an avalanche report and how to read it, some of the rescue equipment that's required. And last, we'll talk about recognizing some avalanche terrain. So if any of you have any questions, there will be a section in Facebook in the comments section where you can type your questions, or if you're logging on to us with YouTube, in the live chat area. So, and at the end of the session, we also have a Fischer Transalp Backcountry pack that will be given away, and we'll do that live. So stay tuned to the end when we'll announce that winner. So without further ado, as they say, let me introduce Sarah. And Sarah, the first thing I want to talk about is there's a whole bunch of people out there, I think, that are probably either in one of 2 camps. Maybe they've never backcountry skied, and maybe they've been touring up the piste for quite a while and are comfortable with touring gear, but keep looking across the valley at that untouched powder slope and think, you know what, I'd like to be able to go ski that. And then there's some other people that have been skiing the resort that are inclined to go out the boundary gates and access the backcountry that way. So I guess the first question is, Sarah, what's the difference between driving to a trailhead and skiing that untouched slope across the valley and going out of the boundary gates? What's the difference really?
Honestly, there's not much of a difference. Going out the boundary gates might get more traffic because it's out of a ski area, so you have more skiers there. But once you leave the comfort of the ski area, you're in the backcountry. It's, some folks refer to the area outside of a ski area as the side country, but it's no different than driving to a trailhead and just putting your skins on and going backcountry skiing. I think about like ski area versus backcountry as going from an individual sport inbounds, like me, it's all about me. I get to get fresh turns. I don't have to worry about other people, although it's nice to worry about other people. But as soon as you leave the gates or as soon as you go touring, it's all about a team sport. Like you have to work together. You have to assess the snow. You have to be ready to rescue your partners. You have to have good communication.
But surely it's a little bit safer if there's tracks and you can just follow some tracks and get to the goods, right?
I wish that was the case. Yeah, it really isn't. Just because there's tracks on the slope does not mean that you're not going to trigger an avalanche. I years ago triggered an avalanche on a slope that had 21 tracks on it. It was just a matter of I found the weak spot and no one else had found the weak spot. So, the ski area is great because patrollers use explosives and ski cutting and mitigate the slopes. But as soon as you leave the gates, it's you can't rely on tracks. You have to make your own assessment. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point, and I think that's one that's easily missed. Is a lot of people may look at an untouched slope and be a little bit weary of whether they should ski it or not. But if you see 10 tracks in there, 15 tracks, 21 tracks like you found,
yeah,
you feel pretty good about it, but you really shouldn't.
Yeah, it's totally natural to feel better about it because the slope has been tested, but there's not always weak zones all the way across the slope. So every once in a while you might hit, we call it the button. I don't want to call it the sweet spot because it's not a sweet result, but the sour spot, the weak spot. Yeah.
Okay, good. So one of the first things I think we all do when we want to go for a tour or know we're going to ski at the resort and maybe go out of bounds is look at the Avalanche Report. So yeah. That's something. What's the best way to access that? And let's maybe bring one up and we can talk about how to read it.
Yeah. This is the first place I start every morning or the evening before. The place to find every avalanche forecast center in the US, as it shows here, is avalanche.org. And then if you're living in Canada, it's avalanche.ca. And this is kind of the clearinghouse, and then you can navigate this and find where you are. And currently some of the forecast centers are putting out forecasts and some of them are still not quite up and running. So anything with a color has a forecast. And we thought we would pull up that Jackson forecast just because that's where I'm based. It's the easy.
And sorry, for Canada, you said that's avalanche.ca?
Yeah.
Is that CEH or CA?
Good question. CA. A. Yeah, but these forecasts, they all look a little bit different in Jackson, but all of them give you the same information. You get current conditions. So is it snowing? Is it blowing? What's the weather doing? Because weather can make avalanches. You get the recent snowfall. And what I look for when I look at the snowfall, we get 24-hour snowfall. And it may look different in different reports, but you always get that. And basically snow doesn't like rapid change. And so if I see a lot of snow in a period of 24 hours, I need to think about avalanches. So the threshold we have is an inch an hour for 6 hours or more is rapid loading. It's going to change the stability. Or 12 to 18 inches in 24 hours, my little red flag's going to be thinking like, oh, avalanche hazard is increased. So I look at that. And then I also look at the weather forecast for the day, because the other question I want to know is the weather going to contribute to the instability? Is it supposed to dump all day to day and my hazard's going to change? And you can see in the Tetons today, it was low hazard at all elevations. And, as we start getting more snow, obviously that's going to change. And the cool thing, I think, and you can find it on all the other pages, is this definitions of all the avalanche hazards. And this, I think, is an important piece to study, whether you're new to the backcountry or you've been traveling in the backcountry for a long time. This took years to put into place. Everyone went back and forth, but the hazard rating is one word and it tells you a little bit, but really the avalanche forecasters are trying to have a risk conversation with anyone who's reading the forecast every day. And they may say low hazard or moderate hazard, but what they're trying to communicate is the likelihood of triggering an avalanche, and then the size and the distribution, meaning can this avalanche problem, whatever it is, be found all over the mountains? And it's really, no matter where you go, it's going to exist, or is it in a few different places? So low hazard might mean that, natural and human triggered avalanches are unlikely. And if we do trigger an avalanche, it's going to be a small avalanche. As you move up, you're going to get different definitions. And I think this is really useful because you begin to understand that risk. What's the likelihood of something happening and what's the consequence? And the consequence for me is, can I be buried or killed in an avalanche? And as we move up this hazard rating, it's more and more likely.
And this rating is the exact same whether you're in the US or Canada or anywhere in Europe, right?
Yep, it is. Yeah, it's this one. Sometimes they'll use a word, sometimes they'll use 1 to 5, but it's the exact same rating all over. And so that can be really useful. And understanding these definitions sets you up for tour planning. And as we go up the hazard rating, one of the things that I change is the terrain that I choose to travel in. Low hazard, I might feel good about skiing or riding all over. But as we move up to considerable hazard, I'm probably backing off avalanche terrain or skiing minimal avalanche terrain.
So let me ask you this. What we obviously got low all the way to high here, extreme hazard. When do most people get caught?
It's a good question. And we were talking about this a while ago. Most people actually don't get caught or killed in avalanches at extreme or high hazard because it's really obvious. And same for low. It's just hard to trigger an avalanche. So most accidents happen at considerable or at moderate. So that's really where I'm paying attention.
Because it feels better out there. You don't see the cracks, maybe. You don't see the signs of other avalanches.
Exactly.
It may be somebody in your party that's triggering it.
Yeah, it's not in your face all the time. Yeah.
What else about the report is important to note? One thing that I always think about that I do is I subscribe to it. So I have it delivered to my inbox every morning. And even though I may not be going out at all that week, if I read it each morning, I have a much better idea of what's going on and what's happened throughout the week than I would if I just tuned in Saturday morning to go for a tour that day.
Yeah, I think that's super important. I think of it like if you've done any first aid training, it's like taking vitals, and one set of vitals doesn't actually tell you a lot. It's the trend that tells you everything. And so, like you're saying, if you follow along every day, you're getting a better sense of what's actually going on. And so, yeah, I subscribe to ours. I subscribe to a few of them and read them every day. Obviously, I'm on the extreme end in terms of getting 3 or 4 forecast center emails every day, but I think it's a great point of subscribing and looking at that. And then the other thing I think is important with the forecast page is looking for recent avalanches, right? That's our number one indicator of if we have higher avalanche hazard is if people are triggering avalanches or if they're being triggered naturally. So knowing where you can find the avalanche reports on whichever forecast center you're looking at is really important. And that gives you a sense. I look at what's happening, how many avalanches are being triggered, where are they being triggered, like what aspect and what elevation. And obviously those are the places I don't want to go, right? That's kind of where I start my day. Where do I want to avoid?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Talk about some of the equipment that you need to travel safely out there.
Yeah, it looks a lot different. In terms of equipment that I'm going to travel with, my boots and bindings look different, and we'll talk about that another time. But transceiver, super important. And with whatever transceiver you choose to use, my rule of thumb is put it on, turn it on. So this transceiver in the morning when I'm drinking coffee, I turn this on, I put the harness on, and this just goes over my base layer. It doesn't go over my puffy clothes or anything like that. My long underwear top, and then my transceiver goes on. And then other important things, I grabbed a pack here. The other 2 big pieces of gear that are important are a probe. And this basically, if someone's caught in an avalanche, you're going to locate their general area with the transceiver. And then you're going to locate their exact area with the probe. This is like a glorified tent pole. You can put it together. And then a shovel, which is, I can get the blade out eventually here. This is a tight pocket. So transceiver, shovel, probe, those are the main things. And, Mike, we were talking today about the importance of testing your gear at the beginning of the season. And I thought that was a super good point that you made. So anytime before I start touring for the season, I'm going to check and make sure the welds on my shovel are solid and not cracked. and I'm going to make sure my shovel fits together and can extend like it's supposed to. And then we were talking about, oops, that was loud, with the probe, checking all these little, the connectors, the wire connectors, and making sure they're good and not frayed. And then I also just check all these little connector pieces because they can crack. So I'll just check those, and then I'll put this thing together and double check it. And then with transceivers, I'm going to store it over the summer without batteries, and then put brand new fresh batteries in at the beginning of the season.
So that's a great point. I pulled out my probe one year, and this was, I don't remember if it was a guide training day or something, but it sat in my pack, and I didn't use it much that spring because it was rock hard snow and no big avalanche risk. And when I tried to put it together, a piece had rattled out, and it wasn't a big fix unless I was scrambling to put it together to locate a buddy. Then it would have been a huge panic. So that's a great tip about pulling all your gear out and just making sure that everything's in working order. And I think you'll find that pulling batteries too is something that every beacon manufacturer will tell you to do. It's easy to forget, but a corrosive battery, there's a surprising high percentage that, at least higher percentage than I thought, that leaked. And that's a brand new beacon, which none of us want to buy. So good point. What about, do you use an airbag?
I do at times. Here's an airbag that I have. I've got a little lightweight one. When I check this early season, I actually just check and make sure the trigger is actually attached, and that it's on the correct hand. And then I also make sure that the canister is full, because sometimes those can leak. And I asked Backcountry Access about storing them, and they recommend just storing it all attached throughout the summer. So I actually store mine all put together, but I do just double check everything, make sure it's in good order. And then also double check that like no mice have chewed your waist belt, anything like that. That can be really important. But there's always a debate about airbags versus non-airbags. And the advantage of airbags is basically it makes you a bigger particle. And so if you think about a bag of chips and you shake the bag of chips, all the big ones rise to the top and the crumbs go to the bottom. I like to do that. Shake it, eat the big ones, leave the crumbs for my husband. And basically your airbag makes you that big chip. And so you're more likely to float to the top of an avalanche if you're caught in an avalanche. And obviously that's the worst case scenario. You don't want to get caught, but that's the advantage of the airbag. The thing to know though, is that if you pull it and you're this big particle, you're going to go further in the avalanche. So if you're worried about terrain below you, if there's a big cliff below you, if there's really nasty trees below you, it might not be the place to deploy an airbag. So I think of them as kind of an expert tool. I think they're really useful, but I also think you need to practice with them and understand the pros and cons.
Good point. Yeah, I mean, the thing I like about the airbags too is that it's a, as opposed to what could be a really stressful situation, if you come over a roll and there's a bunch of avalanche debris and you don't see your buddies anywhere, and now it's panic and stress time, and you got to get your beacon out and be adept with using it. Whereas if you come over that roll and you see an airbag down there, it's like, oh, there's Bob right there.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So I think it's you know, and when they first came out, they were expensive. They've come down quite a bit in price, and they were heavier too. And I'm like, that's a bunch of weight, and that's, you know, more expense even on a deal. And then I thought, it's like, how much would my family pay to bring me back? You know, more than that $700? I think so. And right after that, I said, okay, I went and bought one the next day. I said, this is crazy. It's such cheap insurance.
Yeah, that's a great way to frame it. Yeah. Yep. I think it's a really useful tool. Obviously, I wouldn't use it without a transceiver as well. So I think I've seen these debates of like transceiver or airbag? And I'm like, both, but start with transceiver. So
yeah, seatbelt or lock your door.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, what about avalanche terrain, traveling in avalanche terrain, recognizing avalanche terrain? What do you
Yeah.
use when you're starting a tour? What are the angles that you're concerned about, and how do you spot those?
So most avalanches, like 90 some percent of avalanches, happen in terrain that's 30 to 45 degrees. If you're transitioning from the ski area to the backcountry, you can think about oftentimes like blue slopes, intermediate slopes are somewhere 25 to 30 degrees in steepness, although our local Snow King is way steeper. But most intermediate terrain is like 25 to 30 degrees. And then when you move up to black diamond or double black diamond terrain, that's avalanche terrain, really, if you want to think about it that way. And then there's a few other ways you can measure it. There's these little slope meters. They're like 15, 20 bucks. And basically you can place this bottom part on a slope and read, there's a little rolling ball that'll read the slope angle for you. You can also line this up with a slope far away and read the slope angle. Or if you don't have this, if you have an iPhone, if you go to the measure tool and use the level, it's exactly this in a digital format. So measure tool on your iPhone is the easiest, cheapest place to start. But
I think the iPhone also, it's much easier to read, right? Because a lot of those, and I have one on my compass too, but even when I had good eyes, I couldn't read that one. So
yeah, the iPhone is nice because it's got big writing. So
right.
It's really just using that bottom edge of the iPhone, line it up with on the slope or with the slope that you're sighting across the way. The disadvantage of these things is you can't shoot straight on. So if I'm standing at the base of the slope and I'm trying to measure the slope angle, this thing's not going to do you any good.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay. And how about transferring that? And we'll get into this more in the latter sessions, but let's just touch on a little bit. We're not quite talking about tour planning and navigation. We'll dive into those later on, but a little bit about looking at maps and trying to figure out where you're going and whether you're traveling. And it's one thing for us to look at a slope and go, okay, yeah, that's an intermediate slope, or I think that's 30 degrees. Where do people get off? Because I know a lot of guides and avalanche educators look at slopes so often that they have a pretty good eye for how steep that is.
Yeah.
And some of them think they have a better eye than they do. So tell us a little bit about how easy it is to estimate a slope angle.
It's so tricky. When you first start out, what I've found is beginners estimate that they're in terrain significantly steeper than what they are in. So we'll be on a 20-degree slope and they'll guess it's 30 or 33.
That's for the story. Dude, it was like...
Exactly. Yeah. But when you're first beginning, it feels intimidating. So you estimate that it's steeper. And then I've found more experienced people do the opposite. And they're like, oh, it's 25 degrees. And you pull out your slope meter and it's 35 degrees. And so you see that shift. I basically carry a slope meter in my pocket. And then I have a printout of my local area that I like to ski. And I've actually measured most of the start zones, like most of the top of the slope of the runs that I ski often, and I actually write in the slope angles. And so each fall I can pull out that map and go, oh yeah, okay, this terrain is non-avalanche terrain, less than 30 degrees, and this place is prime time. Basically, you see the most avalanches between 38 and 40 degrees. Like that's your prime time slope angle. So I think that can be really useful. And then we were talking a little bit about mapping and using some online resources. And I like CalTopo is one. And then the other one that I use is Gaia GPS. But with CalTopo that's showing on the screen, we clicked on the slope shading button. And when you're looking at this, it's on your right, or it's on your left, excuse me, it says slope shading. And then you can see the key across the way on your right. And so the yellow is you're at the low end of avalanche terrain or non-avalanche terrain. and moving into orange and red, you see that you're in avalanche terrain. So this to me is a great place to start. I look at where I might want to ski that day or the next day and get a sense of where am I beginning to enter avalanche terrain, where am I out of avalanche terrain. The thing to note about this is these maps and our ability to measure slope angle is like plus or minus 3 to 5 degrees. So I use this as a basic tool, but you can't turn off your brain when you're out in the field. So have a sense of when you're going to be in avalanche terrain and when you're not. And then when you're out touring, double check yourself, measure those angles.
Okay. So can we zoom in on this a little bit? I think what's interesting here too is, so on Gaia or Caltopo, is it when does it begin to be yellow? Is that 27, 28 degrees?
Yeah.
Right in there. Okay.
27 to 29.
And that's an interesting point too, because we talk about avalanche terrain, like you said, being above 30 degrees. But I mean, if you had extreme hazard, I probably wouldn't want to be on 30 degrees either. So it depends on the rating as well. But the other thing that I think it's important to note, the 2 times I've been in an avalanche, I was standing on 15-degree slopes, but they were attached to much steeper slopes. But it was pretty gradual. The one, and somebody triggered the slide from almost a half a kilometer away, and it propagated all the way to the steeper slopes above us. And then even on 15 degrees where we felt pretty safe, all of a sudden we were moving.
Yeah.
And the other thing I think is interesting to note is that the other time, again, it was probably 15 degrees and it was flat light. And we were touring. And so I was barely, I wasn't moving fast at all. I was just trying to get around this pitch. And all of a sudden, the steepness increased dramatically, and I didn't even notice it at first. And then I thought, wow, this is really steep. And then I was moving.
Yeah.
So flat light, poor visibility is a big red flag, especially when you don't know that terrain intimately. Because if you're in safe terrain, 25 degrees, but it's flat light and you can't tell quite how steep it is above you, you could be in a real hazardous spot.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really good point. I think having terrain knowledge is important, or having one of those maps on your phone so you can figure out where you are. And I agree, in whiteout, I've gotten lost in the backyard on Teton Pass pretty easily. So even intimate knowledge can backfire when you can't see anything. So.
And sometimes intimate knowledge is more dangerous because you think you know it. Because I did the same thing here on our version of Teton Pass, Galena Pass, and there's just one subtle ridge that separates the right side of the road and the left side, and you come down on one side, and I came down on the complete wrong side, and didn't know until I saw the road going up instead of down.
Yeah.
And I went, oh no. So you need to be vigilant. And the other thing that I think is cool about Caltopo is you can pick a route up that's pretty benign. You can go, you know what, I'm just going to stay on white all the way up for my up track and my down track, and be pretty safe. But there's some micro navigation or attention that you need to have, because those are all 40-foot contour lines. And as I learned once taking a shortcut in the backcountry, I left the trail because it was late and we were running behind. And you can have a 39-foot cliff wedged into those 40-foot contours and never know it's there. Yeah. And of course, I didn't discover it until it was dark and backtracking was a long ways away. So the same thing can be said for a steeper pitch, is what is my point. So even though it's wide on the map, that doesn't mean there can't be a start zone in there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great point. And I think, all the tour planning that we do before we leave the house is really helpful, but it's just the starting point. it's not your answer. So, yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And do we have any questions? Where do we see questions?
I haven't seen any.
Maybe there's no questions. We've really answered everything.
Yeah, I have there's a comment that says, listen to Mike. So that's a good one. I think, if we don't have questions, one other thing that we were talking about in terms of being prepared for the backcountry instead of the ski area is I always bring a puffy jacket along with my transceiver shovel probe. Like part of my important kit is a big puffy jacket in case something happens, and then a first aid kit, a repair kit, and a headlamp. Those are things that just always come with me no matter what. And then this year, the buff that I can double over and use as a face mask as well. I've got a couple of these every time. But those are important things. So
that's a good point, because often when we're moving, especially if we're skiing and you're moving and you're generating warmth, you think I'm totally fine out here. But if you have something go wrong and you're sitting there, you can get cold in a hurry, and a puffy adds no weight at all. Yeah. And it makes your pack look big and heavy. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then if you want to go the extra mile, one of those little mini space blankets, those things are great as well. I carry like a giant guide tarp rescue sled, but really one of those little space blankets is awesome to have. Again, if anyone gets hurt, you at least have some way of trapping heat versus
right.
losing it out all night. So.
No, that's a good point. And I actually have like 4 different weights of tarps, big burly, a big broader guide tarp, all the way down to one of those whatever AAA rescue tarps.
Yeah.
For when I really don't think I'll need it, but it's not much weight, and why not? Because you never know.
Yeah, that's mine is this is sort of like my little my quick run, my one run between work pack, and then I got a big one for other, for my full day tours. And yeah, someone wrote power bars as well. Yeah, food, water, important. Water wise, I actually love these. I know it says wine, but I promise it's water. I love these little collapsible water bottles, because as you drink your water, it takes up less space.
Right.
That's sort of my little, I like my pack to shrink during the day.
Yeah, I'm actually partial to Nalgene's, because if I start out a tour with a hot water bottle, I can keep adding snow to that, and I can stretch 1 liter to 2 liters in the springtime. Not as much in the winter because it's much colder, but I can get maybe 1.5 liters out of it if I start with a hot water bottle.
Yeah, that's a great way to do it.
Okay. Anything more to add? It doesn't look like we've got any questions. So we will email the winner of the backpack winner is Chris Wilcox. Chris, congratulations. You are now the proud owner of a Transalp 35 backcountry pack, and we will email you and get your shipping address so we can get that out to you. And if nobody has any other questions, we will have 2 more episodes starting next Tuesday. So it'll be the next 2 consecutive Tuesdays. So I think that's December 1 and December 8th. And in those we'll do a little bit deeper dive into the avalanche forecast and how to read it, and look at some of because they'll give you different hazards. The avalanche hazard may be storm slab or wind slab or persistent slab, and those are all very different, and you need to treat all those different. So we'll take a deeper dive into that, and then we'll go through some of the stability tests too. And then the last episode will really branch a little bit away from specific avalanche knowledge, because most people, I think that they're their barrier to entry or their entry into the backcountry is getting a level 1 avalanche certificate. And once they have that, it's like, great, I'm good to go. But there's a lot of other things that are important that will allow you to travel safer and more enjoyably. And we'll get into some of those: navigation, track setting, tour planning. The cool thing about tour planning, I think, is you can apply this to anywhere, even if you've never been there, and get a pretty good idea of how long that tour is going to take you. So anyways, those are some of the other topics we'll cover. If you have any questions, text us, email us, write it on the website, and we'll address those questions. So thanks, everybody, for joining us. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks
for your awesome information, and stay safe out there, everyone.